Hey, what's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I'm your host, Cody Goodwin. We got the gang all back together. Mike Rodak, Alex Scarborough. Alex, you missed a light week last week. We only did one show because I was struggling with a sinus infection. I'd like to think I'm on the back end of that now, but we got a lot to discuss on today's show. A couple of stories that Alex wrote. He got to talk with Greg Byrne on Monday in Birmingham. We're also going to talk some Tide hoops. We usually start these shows with our Tide Hoops Minute. We're actually going to kick that to the end of the show to have that discussion because spring football is officially here. It is March. And in addition to the March Madness, it's also spring football season, especially here in Alabama. The Crimson Tide had their very first practice yesterday, Monday. We are recording this on Tuesday, March 4th. We are going to recap some of the things that we learned from getting to talk to head coach Kalen DeBoer after that first spring ball practice on Monday. He talked to us for 20 minutes or so, talked about some injuries, talked about some position groups that he's going to be paying attention to. He did mention the quarterbacks, but also some of the more thin spots like offensive tackles and tight ends and linebackers. And I think that's where we should probably begin. Mike, you were there with me in Tuscaloosa. What was kind of your biggest takeaway from Kalen DeBoer's comments after the first spring practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think the depth is certainly going to be, let's say, tested this spring. It's not like they're playing a game, but like they only have so many players at certain spots. And that could affect what they do on A-Day. That's the only thing people are going to see this spring. Like we always talk about like what to watch in the spring or what we're watching for. Like fans can't see anything until A-Day, and we can only watch parts of 2 practices. So what we're actually seeing is not very extensive, but in terms of what they're doing behind the scenes for 15, 14 practices before A-Day, their tight end room, their offensive line room is certainly banged up. Not any surprise that Caden Proctor is not going to be available because of shoulder surgery that he had coming out of last year. Had the whole, is he going to play in the bowl game situation? The tight end room, Danny Lewis is out. You already lost CJ Dupree and Robbie Oots, which might I just add as a quick aside, Robbie Oots, very underrated departure from this team. I think a very solid player that people probably forgot about, probably won't think about, but a player that when he's blocking and doing what he does, like that helps the offense. And there's not an obvious replacement for him on the roster.
Well,
and I think
coming out of the combine, Cody can put his shirt up. Sneaky athletic. Who knew that? Who knew Robbie Oots had hops?
I think it was the tallest broad jump in X number of years for a tight end over 270.
I think him and Dupree both also had the most bench press reps for tight ends. I think Dupree had just over 30 and Robbie, I want to say, had like 26, 27 reps at 225. Yeah. So strong guys, very strong guys.
Right. And so, you kind of know that going into the season, Cuevas and I think Danny Lewis will be your top 2 guys. Right now, Lewis is out. Cuevas is kind of the number 1 guy. Jay Lindsey was a freshman last year, in-state kid, is probably your number 2. And then you have 2 freshmen coming in, you only have 1 freshman who's here right now, Marshall Pritchett. Caleb Edwards is not here until the summer. Otherwise, you're looking at walk-ons, which include 2 transfers. Peter Knudsen from Weber State and Jaden Hobson, who was a 3-star offensive tackle prospect who originally played or was with Mississippi State, didn't play his freshman year, ended up going to South Alabama last summer, left the team to enter the workforce, and then is here in Tuscaloosa. So you're pulling together some guys to hold a spring practice at tight end. And offensive line, like I said, Proctor's out. You're already without Tyler Booker from last year. So you're moving some guys around. Gino Vandermark looked like he was at first team at left guard for the Gino Vandermark fans in the world.
Just remember that last year there was a lot of everybody who came back seemed to get the first team reps.
Right.
In the first practice.
Their first team offensive line yesterday looked like it was Olas Alanen at left tackle, who's been at guard for the last couple of years as a backup. Your left guard was Vandermark, Brailsford was your center, Jaden Roberts back at right guard, right tackle is Wilkin Formby. And it looked like your second team line would have been Dewberry at left guard, Montgomery was in there. Or right guard, Joseph Ionata at center, Casey Poe, another freshman last year at right tackle. So it does look like the returners kind of got the first crack at things. The left tackle in that situation, I did not see.
I was going to say, did the second team just not have a left tackle? They're just like, we're going to roll 4 guys out there and see what happens.
But again, you're bringing in Arkel Onugwam from Ball State, who hasn't really played very much football. Jackson Lloyd is a freshman who will probably play a little bit or practice a little bit in one of those spots. So you're thin along the offensive line. And I think that's a big reason why the A-Day format could be a little bit changed, or it already was last year. I think maybe some people forget that last year was just offense versus defense. It wasn't really crimson white as we've known it. And look, you only have 3 scholarship quarterbacks. Obviously, they're in a non-contact jersey, but you don't want a freak injury to any of them because then you're really thin at quarterback. I'm sure that's part of the calculus when you're looking at how to practice, not just before A-Day, but also during A-Day.
The thinness of the roster, or at least certain parts of the roster, was kind of the big theme from talking to DeBoer after practice, which we'll go ahead and he actually kicked it off. Nobody even asked. He kicked it off with kind of an updated injury list. There are 11 total players, including 5 that started multiple games last year, that will either be out or limited during the spring practices over the next month and a half. The guys who are out: Alex Asparuhoff, who's a kicker punter; David Bird, the long snapper transfer; Bubba Hampton at receiver; Cavante Henry at defensive line; Damani Jackson, Deontay Lawson, Danny Lewis, Keon Sabb. 3 other guys will be limited: Justin Jefferson at linebacker, Caden Proctor, and then James Smith on the defensive line. Alex, I'll loop you in here. What's maybe the biggest worry positional wise in terms of, I get, when we think of spring ball, it's more about, development. You guys understand the installs and they feel confident going into the summer ahead of fall camp. But what position group, or what makes you most worried or hesitant about just development this spring after listening to that list of names?
Honestly, it's the depth at tackle and it's the depth at tight end. A little bit more tight end, to be honest with you, just because you're losing so much experience. Yes, Cuevas is coming back, but you don't know what you're getting out of Danny Lewis. You don't know what you're getting out of the young guys and the walk-ons and the transfers. It's just kind of so up in the air. I don't worry about a ton in the spring, to be honest with you, just because it's like, at the end of the day, yeah, it kind of is going to mess with how they practice. But the worst case scenario, since a lot of these guys that we're going to talk about are proven guys, is that the guys behind them get more reps and will hopefully develop. But the depth at tight end and the depth at tackle is interesting. The whole Michael Carroll playing a little bit of tackle with Proctor out, I think, is interesting. I wonder what that portends in terms of the left guard competition. Jackson Lloyd, you brought up another name. Very curious to see how he develops. But yeah, it's a thin roster in the spring. I think by the time it's all said and done, we're going to count probably around 20 people coming out of last season who missed significant time during the offseason because of injuries. And that really tells you how banged up they were late in the year. Right.
And it's not the first time they've been thin at certain spots in the spring. I can remember the offensive line a couple of years ago being pretty thin. It's different every year, kind of where the problem area is. I think wide receiver at some points has been thin, etc. It does help that the health settlement hasn't been finalized yet, which won't happen until April. And once the health settlement is finalized, your entire roster limit is going to be 105 players. That includes walk-ons as we've known them. Right now, Alabama's at 124 players, including walk-ons, and then you have the 3 summer enrolling freshmen. So you have the benefit of having a lot of these bodies in the spring. That includes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 walk-ons along the offensive line, and almost a dozen in the secondary as well. Yes, sir.
Is this a distinction without a difference?
It's becoming one.
Because and I think we both expect this, you're just going to have practice squad players.
Mm-hmm.
Does it make any difference? Because it's not going to, the game's still the game, where if you're getting to your 4th-string guy, you got bigger problems than how many walk-ons you have.
Right.
But
I'm just saying in terms of the spring,
it shouldn't change if you're able to have a practice squad.
Right. In terms of the spring, it gives you some bodies to have these spring practices, having 124 players on your roster. Yeah. I don't know. I forget what the house summit, if it's going to be the roster limit goes into place in August or in September. I don't know if you have these guys for camp or not, but one way or the other, you're going to have to cut 22 players off your roster, whether it's guys just leaving on their own, guys going to the portal. You might be gaining players in the portal though in the spring. So you're not going to have the same benefit of having a bunch of bodies out there if you do have injuries at certain spots in the fall. So that's all part of this. And you're probably going to have to change the way, you practice. But with the House settlement, temporarily, at least the SEC is going to have an 85 player scholarship limit. May not stay long term. And if it doesn't stay, there's no scholarship limit for the NCAA anymore. It's just a 105.
And that's the same thing. Is a scholarship limit now a distinction without a difference? Because we know it doesn't matter.
Right.
You can just put them on an NIL scholarship.
Exactly. Now, the SEC is still saying it matters because they're putting out the limit for this year.
The SEC says a lot of things.
Right. But the way this is all designed is scholarships go away really because you can pay any player any percentage of scholarship you want, or just pay him rev share or pay him NIL or whatever. So all of that gets very blurry. Of those 105 players, you could have everybody on scholarship 100%. You could have everybody 0% scholarship. You could have any combination in between. So all of that is about to go out the door, and it's just one of many things that is changing around these parts.
College football, the only constant is change, it seems like. DeBoer also made mention of the quarterbacks. He got a few Keelan Russell questions, who I think, Mike, you were maybe the one that wrote this, or it was just kind of circulated Alabama Twitter. Guy's put on 17 pounds since he showed up, which is kind of crazy. But, hey, that was one of the worries I think a few of us, or at least I know I had, him coming in kind of a string bean at 6'3", 175. But now he's sitting at about 192. DeBoer mentioned him yesterday, again, answered a few questions about him, also talked a little bit just about the quarterback battle. Didn't really reveal too much, but it was fun to kind of get his first comments on that. Mike, was there anything worth taking away there, or what do you think about the quarterback battle now that spring ball is finally here?
And we don't know exactly when that 175 measurement was taken. Is it necessarily between January 5th or whatever when he showed up and now? Yeah, it's good. Obviously, he needs to get bigger. I think that was the one knock against him. Even when you're looking at that practice video yesterday, like Austin Mack, Keelan Russell, there's a difference in terms of just size and girth.
Another aside, Austin Mack is a large human being.
Oh yeah,
did you see? Not only, I mean, he's like 6'6", but his hand eats the ball.
It's quite a difference. Just in Austin Mack and Ty Simpson for that matter too. But in terms of what DeBoer said, probably the most generic answer possible. It was Nick Kelly. You kind of jokingly asked, like, have you solved the quarterback competition today? And obviously Kalen kind of laughed it off and said no. It would have been quite a story if Kalen walked out there day one and was like, yeah, here's our winner. But then, Kalen said the guys are at different points and they've done some good things and not so good things, basically. Like, thanks. Like we expected that out of practice, but that's about the most we got. But he wasn't, I will say he didn't hesitate to use the word elite to describe Keelan Russell, which is true, obviously, given his recruiting stature. But sometimes coaches are very careful to throw out words like that early on, and that is the word that he used to describe Keelan Russell.
I also feel like, just based on what he said when Keelan signed, what he has said in like the sit down with Alex, which we didn't really get to hash out too much, Alex, because you were out of town last week. We talked a little bit about it. And then what he was able to say, like using the word elite, and you could tell that there is a level of excitement to DeBoer when it comes to talking about this guy. And Alex, I'll loop you in here. I don't want to say that DeBoer is like kind of quietly rooting for his guy to win the job, but you can tell that like having Keelan in the room, it's only been a practice, having him on campus for the last couple months, like you can tell DeBoer, who is normally very level-headed, even keel, pretty excited about this guy. Like, at least that was one of the takeaways I had.
Ignore me being a dad. Even Keelan.
Keelan and Kalen.
Keelan and Kalen, yes.
To use your term, this is his baby. This is the first guy he gets to bring in at that position. And oh, by the way, it's the number 2 player in the country, a 5-star quarterback who you believed in before a lot of people did. But he is the highest ranked recruit in Alabama history.
I believe that's true. So
yeah, there's a lot to be excited about. And if you gave him truth serum and you said, what do you want to happen? It'd be very interesting to see, would he want him to start right away and be successful, or would he want Ty Simpson to be so successful year one that he turns pro and he can hand it off to Ty? The interesting thing in this, I remember talking about this a year ago around this time, and we would talk to Nick Sheridan about the quarterbacks, and we'd all go crazy because he wouldn't talk about anybody individually. You have to parse what is being said in the spring because of threat of the transfer portal. So, yes, he's excited about Keelan Russell, but it's also in his best interest to look as excited about him as you can because you don't want him going anywhere. So,
that would be a story.
What's that?
Keelan Russell leaves through the transfer portal in the spring. Look, it's theoretically possible. I'm not going to discount that.
You've
but
got to be excited about everybody. It's the spring. There's the threat of everybody leaving. Ty just takes the job. Like, just because a guy's asked about a player doesn't mean that it's something against the player he's not asked about.
Right.
So let's just keep that in mind as we talk about him. He's an exciting player. It's great he got to 192. I'd like to see him put on 30 more pounds. But he's got a bright future. It's just a matter of when that future arrives.
And I will say, since we're on the topic of the transfer portal in the spring and the quarterbacks, I don't know if they're out of the woods. I mean, I would be shocked if Keelan Russell goes into the portal, but the prospect of losing an Austin Mack, I think, would scare me more than the other two. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see, and I don't know if even they'll have the players, if they'll even communicate this to the players, who's really the 2 and who's really the 3 coming out of the spring. But if you're Austin Mack and you're the third quarterback coming out of this spring and you're staring down the possibility of being a number 3 quarterback and for a third straight year and just using a year of eligibility in that way, there's potentially logic in going somewhere else for this year and trying to get on the field a little bit sooner. So, and then if that happens, then you only have 2 quarterbacks, and then you really need to add someone if you're Alabama, because I think they would like to be at 4. And you're only at 2 if you lose one. So how much longer can they keep Austin Mack? I said it in a previous show. Like, this is Austin Mack's time. This is a NASCAR. This is the back turn. Like, he's got to make his move right now.
3 wide.
3 wide. Otherwise, he could very well be stuck behind Keelan Russell. And otherwise, you're looking to go somewhere else at that point. So
on the subject of timing, I do not expect that we're going to learn who the starting quarterback is going to be this spring. But to go back to what I wrote, I did ask DeBoer this within the context of Nick Saban went years where he didn't even name a starting quarterback. He just said, figure it out on your own. And he said, he pointed out that they did name Jalen Milroe the starting quarterback. And he said, I think if you feel comfortable, you want to do that, it helps you get some direction going into the summer. The summer being the key word there. So if there's separation, if it's clear, he may go ahead and do it. And you've seen coaches do that, especially in the era of the portal and wanting to be transparent. I can think of Dave Aranda as one of those guys who's done it a few times where he's named it a starting quarterback very early. Again, I don't necessarily expect that to happen, but I think that door is open. Whereas those of us who've covered this beat for more than a season have come to expect the complete opposite. So there's that.
DeBoer mentioned a handful of other things. I don't think we need to dive too deep into them, but got asked about Isaiah Horton, the Miami receiver transfer, and just how he brings good big game experience, having played in not just the ACC, but with Miami, a team that played a number of pretty big games last year. Also just super, super productive. Also touched on some of the younger linebackers, specifically the 3 freshmen that were there for the bowl practices, Luke Metz, Abdul Sanders, Duke Johnson, and how those guys are going to get even more reps because both JJ and Deontay are both going to be either limited or out for the entire spring because of various injuries. Also means a guy like Nikai Hill-Green will probably get some run with the green dot on occasion, which probably good for him to build a little bit of depth there. But that was another thing that he mentioned in addition to the depth issues at offensive tackle and tight end, linebacker, another one there where a lot of young guys are probably going to get a lot of pretty good reps this spring. But that was Kalen DeBoer. That was the first spring practice for Alabama. They have 2 more practices this week, the next one being Wednesday. I believe the 3 of us are all going to be there. We're going to be allowed to watch practice, or at least parts of practice, that morning. And then we get to talk to newly hired offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb afterwards. So you guys have that to look forward to later this week. That should be fun. Alex, you spent your Monday in Birmingham talking with Greg Byrne. He didn't say a lot, but it seemed like some of the things that he did say were maybe, perhaps, possibly insightful. He talked about, among other things, college football playoff and a potential for a 9-game schedule in the SEC. What all did you make of Greg's comments in the time that you got with him on Monday?
Basically, that his stance doesn't appear to have changed when it comes to the 9-game schedule. He's not going to say, I want this, I don't want this. He's too calculating to do that. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. It's kind of his job. But basically underlining the fact that they've scheduled for the next few years as if they have 8 conference games. That's why they're playing Florida State and Wisconsin next year. That's why they have Ohio State, Oklahoma, Notre Dame coming up on these schedules. And it's basically his way of saying, if I go to 9 games, I'm not going to do that. And he kind of, within the context of being asked about playoff expansion, again, said he didn't have an opinion on it, but then got back to a very familiar argument, which was strength of schedule. And playing these non-conference games is good for the sport, but that he wants a committee that's willing to look at something beyond this team has 1 loss, this team has 2. Does it sound familiar? SMU. He didn't answer the question, but it's still the theory that I think makes the most sense, that the league is not going to go to 9 games without automatic qualifiers. I just don't see a path forward for it. Greg said that maybe there is. He did not provide one. But if strength of schedule is the thing that you think is the crux of these arguments, and you don't trust a selection committee to value it the way you do, it's your only way forward. So they're tied together. How quickly something like this changes, I don't really know, because it's a kind of a chicken or egg thing. Does the SEC want to just keep talking about 9 games until the playoff pulls the trigger? Do they want to get that already going and think, well, the Big Ten and us, we control everything anyways? Let's go ahead and do it. I'm very curious to see if they even get close to a vote on 9 games in a few months when spring meetings get going down in Destin.
It sounds like they will. I mean, Greg Sankey was on Feinbaum yesterday and basically said, he'd like to see it around the time of the meetings or maybe right after to have some clarity on the 9-game schedule, I think is essentially what he was saying.
But the timing of it, would they really vote to do it without having the playoff set?
Right. There's obviously a correlation there. And I think it's kind of the same thing that happened a couple years ago. It's like they delayed the vote on that because they were waiting on the playoff, and chicken or the egg, one of them's got to go first. I don't know. Greg Sankey framed it as like, we'd like to have some news in the middle of the summer to help you guys out, which to me meant like schedule release and 2026 opponents and all that in June and July. So that's the way they think. Look, I think if you have a 9-game schedule, it seems like it's going to go hand in hand with some sort of agreement with the Big Ten to do a 10th game. That will be like a challenge game between those 2 conferences, which is probably by default going to eliminate the Ohio State series for Alabama. It's going to be worked in there somewhere. And it's a question from there of like, do you want to play an 11th game at West Virginia, 11th power conference game at West Virginia in 2 years or next year, really 2026?
No.
Right. Probably not, but Alabama's afraid of West Virginia is going to be the implication of
what a great headline
series. Right. And the Pat McAfees and, well, I was gonna say the Nick Sabans of the world, the West Virginia natives will be singing their country roads and celebrate that sort of decision if that happens. The Notre Dame games would be interesting. That's a little bit further down the road. Oklahoma State, I mean, are you really afraid of Oklahoma State? Or are you just going to schedule?
Mike isn't, because Mike is not a Gundy fan. He's
Gundy
not afraid.
Sucks. Like, I'm sorry. Just relic of college football past is what he is at this point.
So Mike's an ageist now too. So let's just add that to the list.
Not this past season, but the season before that. Oklahoma State was in the Big 12 title game.
I'm just saying, like, to me, like, he's college football in the 2000s. Like, I picture him as a 2000s coach in the
So you think he's Les Miles?
What if he got a haircut?
Maybe he should. I don't know. It's just the game has passed him by, is my take. Just like people thought of Dabo until he triumphantly returned to the college.
God. Did he triumphantly return?
Triumphantly.
Did he?
Did you not see his post-game press conference?
Wow.
Interview?
You barely beat SMU. Congratulations, you're back. Oh, wait. What happened after that? You got pretty well handled.
Triumphant return where they went to Austin and got squished.
Look, I'm just hoping that Alabama makes its trip to Boston College in 2031. I hope I'm still alive at that point, but I'm just, you never know.
Is there something you need to tell us, Mike?
You never know in life, right? That's a long time away.
There was a time not too long ago, conversation in the murmurs about Nick Saban potentially retiring, and I was like, I think he'll stick it out until Alabama plays West Virginia.
That was always the thought. James Preston, formerly avail.com, would always tell me that. He's like, he's going to stay until the West Virginia series. And
yeah, because Nick Saban, famously sentimental human being.
Right. Look, Nick Saban's going to potentially be at that game if College Game Day is there next year, but I don't think he's going to be coaching Alabama as of right now. It would be a story if he was, but I don't think it's going to happen. Anyway, point being, like, yeah, you can clean up the schedule. I think it seems like from the reporting on this right now that the most likely solution in 2026 and beyond is a 9-game schedule with a 10th game against a Big Ten team. That seems like where it's headed right now.
And by the way,
TV money.
Like, I hate automatic qualifiers. I'm on record as that. I hate it. It's going to make an awesome regular season, though. If we get to 9 conference games and there's a 10th game against a Big Ten opponent, that's going to be great for fans and for coverage. I'm just, not to break my pom-poms out, but much better than watching La Monroe and whatever else BS we got to watch during the 13th.
Southern Miss. There's somebody every year.
Hey, those checks help Mercer out, man. Show some respect.
They do, but I didn't realize we were a socialist state.
Right. And I think some of that's going to go away. And look, it's already going away with the House settlement because a lot of those schools are going to opt out of it and they're not even going to pay players because they can't. So at that point, you are 2 separate entities. Like, stop pretending like you're part of the same thing. You're not.
Here's an idea. If you're going to cut a check to somebody, maybe make it somebody in your own state. Be bright. You got Troy, you got UAB, you got other schools.
But aren't you cutting a check to yourself? That's always like been my.
Yeah, if they play UAB, they would just.
You're not making any money off of that. You're just paying yourself.
Good.
I don't know if Trent Dilfer would like that. You want to get your money from Georgia or somewhere else. Get the money flowing into your state.
If there's a consistent SEC Big Ten, I don't want to call it like a challenge. Which Big Ten teams do you guys want to see Alabama play on a regular basis?
Iowa.
Why would you say that?
Because
I know you don't mean it.
Take it away from Cody.
I know you don't mean it. I wouldn't even say that. Why would I want to watch that?
They've never played, and it's just I want to watch Iowa. Like, I've never experienced Iowa football. I just want to breathe it in and feel it.
You say that, you are so naive. It's adorable. You do not want to watch Iowa play football.
I want to go to Kinnick and just smell.
Kinnick is a good experience. Iowa football is not.
Or whatever you guys eat in Iowa. I don't even know what the food of Iowa is. I've never been in the state in my life. I just want to go there.
Iowa produces and exports more pigs than like every other state in the country. So like really good pork there.
Ryan Grubb was a pig wrangler.
Pig farmer.
Same thing.
Okay, so Mike wants to see Alabama play Iowa. Alex, who do you want to see Alabama play?
Is that your honest pick, Mike? Is you want them to play Iowa?
I mean, we've seen them play a lot of other schools. I did the whole
but Cody asked, who do you want to see them play regularly?
Regular? I don't think they'll play anybody.
Huh?
I think it will all be a rotation. I think you'll play all 18 Big Ten teams. It's going to take you 18 years to get through it. So I don't think they're playing anybody regularly.
Wouldn't it make so much sense to see them? Like, there's a lot of teams that I want to see Alabama play, but like, I don't know. Not that they would because they're at 2 different levels right now, but like Alabama, Washington, like, come on.
Yeah.
It's the layup.
I think the TV people would want to, like they do with basketball, pair the better teams against the better teams, have Alabama play Ohio State every 3 years. But I think the coaches would be like, what the hell? Like, you're making us pay Ohio State more often and you're not giving us Northwestern or whoever. Like, I think you have to make it balanced if you're going to do that, in which case there's 18 Big Ten teams. And that's right now. Like, who the hell knows how many Big Ten teams there's going to be in 5 or 10 years. So
this isn't an Alabama thing, but the first game that should be scheduled is Ole Miss at USC. Just get Lane Kiffin back in.
Right. I mean, look, there could be a day where North Carolina's in the SEC, and then you have the SEC Big Ten challenge between North Carolina and UCLA. You're like, what the fuck are we doing here?
Hell yeah.
They'll take it.
Hell yeah.
That could be eventually what happens.
To finally answer your question, I think there are 2 teams. Penn State, because it's really, they're both applied to Penn State and USC. They're just all-time uniform games. They're all-time blue blood games. Those are the two. I don't love the idea of going to Penn State because it's in the middle of nowhere. It's not easy to get to. It would be a great game. It'd make great television. There's no doubt about that. We've already seen it once. We could see it a million times. I don't think it'll get old. And then USC, if you could just play it in the Rose Bowl, it'd be better. But yeah, those are the.
Coliseum's fun. I've watched the game there.
I
What's
like
your
those.
pick, Cody? Ohio State.
My first thought was Penn State. I think that'd be really, really fun. Or Oregon. Like let's do some new blood Big Ten. I think that'd be really fun. I've never been to Eugene. I think going to Autzen would be like the couple of games that I did watch from Oregon this year. Autzen looks like a really fun atmosphere, and they don't look like they're going anywhere under Lanning. So like that would be a lot of fun. Also, you get the DeBoer Lanning matchup again, and I think that'd be really, really fun. Not a traditional Big Ten team, but hey, sign me up.
I think the TV people would want it to be like basketball. I think you fairly have to do it like it's an even slate. On basketball note, real quick, do you think Duke is going to be coming to Alabama next year for the SEC Big ACC Challenge? Because Alabama just went to North Carolina. Auburn just played Duke last year. Alabama should be hosting a game in that challenge next year.
It would make sense to flip them. Like Auburn plays North Carolina, Alabama plays Duke.
Right. But I think if that game happens, you need to give Alabama the home game.
Well, Auburn was on the road last year too, so that makes sense to have both of those schools come to Alabama.
Right. I think Duke should be coming to Coleman Coliseum as an aside.
It's a shame it's the year after Cooper Flagg leaves, but hey.
It's Duke. I mean, I'm sure they'll have somebody else.
Well, they're not getting AJ DeBanza because we know he's going to BYU.
They don't have Cooper Flagg anymore, or they won't, but they'll have Cameron Boozer, the son of Carlos Boozer, who's the number 3 overall prospect coming in.
Is he a twin or does he just have a brother? I thought they were, if they weren't twins, one of them reclassified because I thought there was 2 of them.
He's a fraternal twin, Caden, a 5-star point guard.
Seems good.
Caden Boozer, who is part of the 2025 class, and he is currently uncommitted, but he's a top 5 prospect as well. And they do look exactly alike. So yes, you could have 2 players on Duke next year who look exactly alike. In fact, he's projected to go to Duke and are the son of Carlos Boozer. So see, that could be fun. I would not mind covering that in Coleman Coliseum at all.
This is our transition into our Hoops Minute, which is kind of the end of the show. We're making really good time here, guys. I like this. Alabama now 23-6, 12-4 in SEC play after losing to Tennessee last Saturday. Lost on a buzzer-beating 3-pointer. Alabama led by 4 with 36 seconds left, melted down, gave up 7 consecutive points. Was kind of a bummer of a way to lose what was otherwise, I thought, a really good game and a really good game that I thought Alabama deserved to potentially win. You can say the same thing about Tennessee. It was just a really good game between 2 top 6 teams, and Alabama came up on the rough side of it. The game itself, do we have any lingering takeaways, thoughts from the result? Mike, you look like you want to say something.
This was not Alabama's worst game of the season, the Tennessee game, much like the football game. You just lost it at the end. It was a game where I think you showed up in a tough environment. Cody was there. You can probably attest to it.
Great environment, honestly. Like it was awesome.
It's a better arena than what Alabama has. Like no doubt about it. I think you played pretty well offensively against the number 1 defense in the country. Shot 42%, 38% from 3. Like that is probably good enough. The layups were an issue like they were in some previous games. Their free throw shooting was a little bit of an issue. Aiden Holloway going 0 for 3 at that stretch was pretty shocking. But you out-rebounded Tennessee by 11. You limited your turnovers for the most part. Obviously, that really kind of fell apart at the end with the foul turnover, with the 5-second violation. Not the foul, but the violation turnover. Phylon had turned over the ball essentially, but there was a jump ball that kept it with Alabama. He had the Jaron Stevenson foul on that free throw that gave Tennessee an extra possession there. So a lot of stuff went wrong at the very end. But the entire game as a whole, it's not like the Missouri game or not like the Auburn game or not like the Ole Miss game where, you just throw the game out and say, that was crap. It wasn't. But it still counts as a loss, and it should have been a game that they won. And now you're in a position where you really need to win one of your 2 remaining games to really feel good about a double bye, a top 4 seed in the tournament. That would guarantee it. If you do win against Florida or win against Auburn, that would guarantee a top 4 seed. If you beat Florida tomorrow night, that guarantees a top 3 seed. And if you lose, then you're right there with Missouri again, and you're hoping Missouri loses one of their 2 remaining games. So, if you're trying to win an SEC tournament title, playing 4 games in a row is a tough way to do it. When Alabama's won the SEC tournament, they've done it getting a double bye and only playing 3 games. So these games still matter for that, even though they don't matter for the SEC regular season title. And like I've said, they don't really matter in the big picture in terms of where this team's going or could go with the national championship. But if you're looking at what these games mean, I think a double bye is really the incentive to win, besides, beating Auburn, your arch rival, and all that. Which people ask, like, is Auburn going to rest starters and not play on Saturday? Like, I don't think so. I don't think so. Auburn's locked up the SEC, yes, but I do not see them laying down on Saturday. I think if they can beat Alabama at all, they'll be happy. If they can really beat Alabama, I think they will be even happier on the plains, because that's just how things go around here. So I would not expect an Auburn retreat, if you will.
No, I think that they'll go for the season sweep. But you made a good point about the loss to Tennessee for Alabama having big implications. For starters, you pair Tennessee's win with Auburn's win over Kentucky earlier that day. The Tigers did clinch the SEC outright. There's still 2 games left, but the Crimson Tide have work to do to clinch a double bye, starting with home game against Florida on Wednesday. But also, Alabama's bid for a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament also took a hit with the loss to Tennessee. I know that that's not like the biggest thing on people's minds, but I think you'd rather be a 1 seed than not. And so I think most projections have dropped them to the 2 line with that loss. I think there's still time for them to potentially climb back into the 1 line, but it all just kind of depends on, one, how they do this week with Florida and Auburn, but then also probably how, if they can make a run to, I don't know, maybe the SEC final. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not the foremost bracketologist, but I feel like there is still a path for them to get to the 1 line if they perform well down the stretch here. However, the loss to Tennessee is Alabama's 3rd loss in the last 5 games. We saw last season going into March Madness, they lost 4 of 6 down the stretch at the end of the season. Alex, I'll loop you in here. Are we worried? Or is this just a tough stretch of games? Do we think they can figure it out? I think I'm in agreement with Mike that they didn't play their best against Tennessee, but they certainly didn't play bad. The loss kind of makes it feel Just how do we feel about this team, especially now that March is here?
I think the worry has to start to creep in, because something has to click, and it just hasn't fallen into place. And you'd hope in a game where everything by and large went pretty well, you'd find a way to win. So there's the flip side of that, those problem spots you more or less solved, and you still didn't come out on top. Why you have a true freshman inbounding the ball, don't really know. Why you don't have a player getting in the face of a shooter late when refs do not blow the whistle, I don't know. So you can brush it off and say they played well by and large, but you can also say, why didn't they get the job done? And that's really been the story of the entire season, is that they've shown you flashes of what they can be. They just can't put it all together. Can it click late and they can go on a run? Absolutely. It absolutely can happen. But the longer this goes without seeing it in person, the more you have to wonder, is this just going to be another team that we wonder what its true potential was?
Right. And the funny thing about that last play was, and Nate said this on his radio show last night, that Rick Barnes actually was trying to call a timeout. I think Barnes told Nate that, like, once Meshack crossed midcourt and they still had 1 or 2 seconds on the clock, Barnes was actually calling the timeout. They just didn't see him. And he got the shot off, and it worked out well. Yeah, I agree. I think Jeff Goodman from wherever he works now, the Field of 68, he put it pretty well. And he had a little video clip that he put out after the game. And he kind of summarized it by saying, I don't have as much confidence in Alabama as I thought I would at this point in the year, which I think is a really good way of putting it. And that's kind of where I would stand. And I've said this before, like, you thought this team would be something a little bit more. I don't say it was billed that way, but I think there was certainly expectations and justified expectations going into the season that this team would be right up there as number 1 in the country, or number 2 or number 3. So it just hasn't, the sum of the parts is not what the whole has been. And injuries to some extent have played a role in that, but it's still just, it's everything. And it's different things in different games, but it's not quite there. And you can envision how things would go wrong for Alabama if they do lose a game in the NCAA tournament. And, you've seen different formulas and recipes for that. So And that's true for most teams, but it's just they're not Auburn, and Auburn is kind of the UConn of last year at this point. Like they're just rolling. They are rolling, and that's going to be a tough team for anybody to beat anywhere. So it's an interesting spot. You know, you're not going to face the teams that you will after the SEC tournament. That's the good news, I guess, is that you're getting some relief by going into the NCAA tournament. But just what happens and where does it all lead, and nobody knows. And like I said, we've seen it happen different ways. We've seen this basketball team struggle down the end of the regular season and then play better in March like they did last year. We've seen it. They played really well and they've won an SEC tournament and then they've gotten knocked out in the Sweet 16. That happened twice. We've seen it go different ways. So you don't really know. Nobody really knows. But again, you can see the way that it would happen. Like if they lose a game, you can kind of see how it would happen. I think it wouldn't be the most shocking result of all time.
I think it was Nate that billed this as a potentially really special season back in, I don't know, October, November, whenever he kind of jumped on Hey Coach to talk for a minute before Kalen came on. And I think it still can be a special season. It can still be a pretty special month for these guys, even despite losing 3 of 5 and playing as inconsistently as they have to this point in the season. They can still, like, I still think they have the talent to do it, but you're running out of time to try and figure out the best way to utilize that talent. And I think that gets to Goodman's point about not having a lot of confidence in them. Like, I think when Alabama plays at their best, and we've seen moments of that, like when they went, and I know UNC hasn't had the best season, but they went into, you know, the Dean Dome and blew the doors off of them. They went toe to toe and took down Houston. And I kind of thought on Saturday they were going to do the same thing to a really good Tennessee team. And perhaps a win over Tennessee changes the conversation slightly enough to just feel a little bit more confident about this team. But I don't know. Like, it's just, I guess it's easier to probably point out flaws following a loss. And these are flaws that we've been talking about for a lot of the year. Just the turnovers, the sometimes the offense can go cold, and just the frenetic nature of this team when compared to a team like Auburn or Duke, where they're very even keel, they're very steady. You know what you're getting with them almost all the time. Same thing with Houston. I was watching them play for a little bit last night. Like, Alabama's going to have to hit those highs more often than not, similar to what they did last year, if they're going to want to get back to the Elite Eight, potentially the Final Four, and maybe contend for the whole thing. So the pieces are there. It's just that frenetic nature again. The inconsistency is, I understand Goodman's point because I agree with it.
And the runaway train sort of games are fewer and farther between than they have been in some other seasons. We've had a few of those lately. You know, the Mississippi State game, Texas game, you just start hitting threes like the game's over. But the games where it doesn't necessarily happen that way and you're trying to win other ways, it's been iffy. But, you know, you brought up the Oates thing from September. He said, we've got a special team and we know it. You know, I wouldn't miss anything you possibly can be at this season because it's going to be a special season. We're going to play the type of basketball that the fans are going to want to support and be at. Let's Phil Coleman every time. Let's support this team because it's not that often you get to put a team of this caliber together. Again, I think a lot of it's justified. Like, this roster is and has been stacked. You get some injuries, you get some things that don't always fall your way. To me, it's like you just don't have every single player always playing up to his capability. And I think we've seen that with Sears probably up until lately, where he's been playing very well. We saw that with Cliff Amore for a good stretch of the season. We've seen that with Grant Nelson, again, partly because of injury. If you get 15, 20% more out of some of those players, then I think it makes a big difference. But you're at the point in the season now, it's March 4th. Like, time to do that is now. You're running out of time because for those players I just named and Chris Youngblood as well, they're gone. You know, this is it. This is the last hoorah for college basketball for him. So the time to do it is now.
No better time than now. Alabama plays tomorrow, Wednesday, 6 p.m. Central against Florida, who hung on to number 5 in the most recent rankings. That game's going to be on ESPN2. Then they finish the regular season on Saturday against Auburn. That is all we've got on today's show. We'll probably be back, my guess is Thursday, because we have a pretty busy Wednesday coming up with being able to watch practice. We get to talk to Grubb. And then there's obviously a basketball game. So we'll be back probably Thursday to recap all of that and continue the spring ball discussions and see if we learn anything new from Alabama's new-ish offensive coordinator. He held the job for like a week last year. Like, is he full new or is he new-ish? How are we doing this?
If you never came up on the staff directory, did you hold the job?
He got paid last year.
I think that matters.
He got a paycheck last year, and he went up in front of the Red Elephant Club and said, "I'm the offensive coordinator of Alabama." To which everybody said, "Oh, that must mean he's not going to the Seahawks." And I said, "Just talking about the here and now," and he was right.
I'm currently the offensive coordinator for Alabama.
Right. Doesn't mean he's going to be, right?
Well, now he is. Now he's on the staff directory, and we get to talk to him after practice tomorrow on Wednesday. So we'll be back Thursday to discuss all of that. In the meantime, though, be sure to rate and review this show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 247 and 24/7 Sports. We got a lot of Alabama content coming this month. Good chunk of it might be behind the paywall. We don't want you guys to miss a thing. So I put a link to subscribe in the show notes. As always, we appreciate you guys for listening. We will talk to you all again soon.